Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss this weekend's reports on how the House of Lords aims to proceed with the Rwanda Bill. It's clear that there's no majority interested in trashing our international reputation to prop up a doomed Tory government, but there is still a worrying angle, which yet again highlights the reasons why the House of Lords needs major reform, not tinkering from Labour. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So this is a tale of two articles, really. There's one in The Guardian, one in the Financial Times. And one of them is sort of like, oh, this is hopeful. And then the other one is like, oh, no, it's not. So The Guardian first is talking about how the Lords may make ratification of the Rwanda Agreement contingent on the government proving that it's a safe country. Bear in mind, the House of Lords is not setting out to block the legislation as such, but to revise it. That's its job, to revise legislation. What we're wanting to know at the moment is how committed are they to making sure that suitable revisions are in place? Because the implication of the House of Lords here would be, for a clause like this, the government has to prove that Rwanda is safe before the agreement can be ratified and therefore put into action. The implication is that there would be no chance of Sunak getting his Rwanda flights in the air this May, or indeed before the election, no matter when it is, even if he found a plane to do so, because it would take some time to establish this. Because at the moment, the default situation is that Rwanda is not a safe country. So there has to be reforms, and then you've got to have time to see if those reforms are working. Now, in a sense, there's nothing at all surprising about the notion that the Lords will, of course, attempt to amend the bill in order to fully comply with our international obligations. That is a given. The big question is what will happen when the revised bill goes back to the Commons and the government reject all of the suggestions and reset the bill back to its original form. Because the Lords mostly offers suggestions, it rarely digs its heels in. For example, when Boris Johnson just won his election, the EU withdrawal bill already existed. It's already passed like the first stage in the Commons already, but then he changed it. He changed it after the election. So he changed, there were things that were promised in the election that he then changed, he went back on. And you think the House of Lords, well, they'll just revise it back, won't they? They'll say, no, you campaigned on this, so that is what you will go back to. They suggested amendments, absolutely. But when Boris Johnson said, no, I want it in the form I gave it to you, they threw their hands up and allowed the bill to proceed, even though it contradicted election promises. Despite the fact there were material changes which meant that Johnson was immediately breaking campaign promises. But withdrawing from the EU was in the manifesto. This was a bill to withdraw from the EU, so the Lords did not ultimately seek to block the bill, even though it had changed since the election. And this is the Salisbury Convention. It's an informal agreement that if the House of Lords is presented with a bill which could be absolutely dreadful in concept, they will attempt to offer revisions to make it more palatable. But if the bill relates to promises in the government's manifesto, they do not hinder it. They offer suggestions. If the government say no, they just go, okay, your choice. We don't just don't come crying to us when it all goes wrong. Now, this is really important. The convention is that they do not block bills which were in the government's manifesto. The Rwanda bill was in no shape or form in the manifesto. It's not even like it was implied. It's not even like the Rwanda bill aims to do something that was covered. There was nothing in the manifesto about small boat crossings. There was nothing in the manifesto about processing offshore or anything that the Rwanda bill could possibly claim to be. In fact, the bill contradicts the manifesto. As such, the Salisbury Convention does not apply here. So the Lords, they don't need to block the bill as such, but they are entirely within their rights to revise the bill to ensure the government does not set itself above the law. And if Sunak removes those revisions and send it back, to just put them right back and send it back again. They're entirely entitled to do that. They can insist that the bill does not pass through their house without these fail-safes in place. But I see worrying news in the Financial Times. The headline is ominous. Labour's ageing peers to respect will of the Commons over Rwanda Bill. What, so Labour peers aren't going to insist on these revisions that keep the government within the law? I'm not sure. It's ambiguous, but it gives the impression that they're not going to play what is known as ping pong, which is where a bill bounces between the Commons and the Lords until either the Commons drops it or they ram it through with the Parliament Act, which the Tories cannot do with this bill in time for the election. So what's the reason? Implied blackmail, basically, in a sense. The report suggests that Labour fear the Tories playing dirty after the election. The Conservatives have a lot more members in the House of Lords than Labour. They've been padding it out ever since they came to power. And Labour's peers, they've not really added to the number since 2007, actually, as the article points out. Labour's peers are significantly older on average than the Conservative peers. In fact, the average age of Labour peers is so high, they do not have the stamina to endure lengthy debates and late night votes. So if there's going to be a real battle in the House of Lords, the Labour peers, most of them aren't going to be there. They're too old. They can't take it. So when you say Labour have got 175 members in the Lords to the Conservatives 270, I mean, that's sort of, the Conservatives already got 95 more, but it's worse than that because many more Labour peers would be unable to cope with those late nights. You simply couldn't get them to turn out for those debates and votes. The report suggests that Labour fear that if they are seen to be blocking this bill from the Commons, that Tory peers will use it as a green light to do the same with Labour's bills after the election. Now, if Labour are not being paranoid here, but if they've got good reason to suppose this, it means the Tories are in effect able to blackmail a Labour government through the use of an unelected chamber that they have packed out with much younger cronies. In fact, thinking about the context of this election, Labour could easily find themselves with, I mean, some of the mad suggestions are like 2/3 of the House of Commons being Labour MPs. Basically, a supermajority of the House of Commons would be Labour MPs. And in actual fact, many of their bills may pass through the House with cross-party support. Rwanda Bill doesn't have cross-party support either. There is like zero mandate for it. But Labour's bill, some of them will have cross-party support and they will represent a supermajority of the Commons. And yet, the Tories could block them in the Lords. Now, the instant reaction to that would be to say to the Tories, look, the Salisbury Convention doesn't cover the Rwanda Bill because you've no public mandate for it. But if you block our bills that were in the manifesto, you will be breaking a long-standing convention and you will force our hand and we are going to abolish the Lords more quickly than planned. The problem is they can't. Starmer has already had to accept that he cannot replace the Lords with an elected chamber in the first term. You know, he has faced distressingly heavy opposition from within his own party about the plans in general. The fear from Labour MPs is that they tie themselves in knots replacing the second chamber, something the public aren't even that bothered about, which will inevitably delay getting their more voter-friendly legislation passed, especially if a soon-to-be defunct House of Lords decides to be difficult about it. But the idea that the Tories can force the Lords to accept a bill which carries the risk of severely damaging our international reputation without a public mandate, just because they have no principles and will trample all conventions when Labour in power, really makes my blood boil. It makes me even more determined that we absolutely should replace the Lords. But I am afraid I'm losing confidence that it will happen. I am frankly astounded that there is so much opposition within Labour, especially when, if the Rwanda Bill does ultimately pass in an unsuitable form, it will highlight just how powerful a weapon these unelected stooges are for the Tories, whether or not they are in power. The article also downplays the fact that Starmer could just pack out the Lords. You know, there was talk about Starmer, he'll just send 100 young Labour peers then. That'll sort them out. That's basically what the Tories have done. Starmer's not keen on that idea, I would say with good reason here. The Lords is already excessively bloated. There are actually way more members of the House of Lords than the House of Commons, which means that over half of all our parliamentarians are unelected. Do you know they keep calling the EU unelected when literally every policymaker is elected? Not in our country. Over half of all policymakers in Westminster are unelected. But I'm not satisfied that Labour really have a plan to even move towards replacing the chamber in the second term. The implication at the moment, if you listen to Labour, is, oh, you can't do it during the first term, so we'll move towards it. I don't think they are moving towards it. I get that the process may take time. In fact, as soon as Starmer announced to great fanfare this idea of replacing the second chamber, I was all for it. But I said in the video, this is going to be challenging, you know. I'm not sure. Has he got a plan to do it in the first term? Because I'm not sure. So I get that it can take time. But if it's going to happen in the second term, I would expect major reforms in the first term to lay the groundwork. Like, if I'm to believe that there's real change coming, I need to see that that change is starting quite quickly. Yet the Labour talking, it applies in this article as well, but whenever I've seen Labour talking about it more recently, there's only one thing they ever talk about doing: removing hereditary peerages. Not even getting rid of hereditary peers. Just stopping the seat being passed down. Now, if that's all Labour have, that is not laying the groundwork to replace the entire chamber at all. In fact, a change like that wouldn't affect anything immediately. It would just mean that when the 8th Duke of Dunning-on-the-Wold dies, their eldest child doesn't become the 9th Duke and take their seat in the Lords. You know, it doesn't affect the existing members, it affects the ones to come. It does nothing to tackle the unsuitability of Johnson's cronies, who are mostly not the hereditary peers anyway. You know, there was a time when I had no issue with the unelected nature of the chamber. In fact, ironically, the hereditary peers are probably the least harmful of the peers in the chamber, because they're sort of brought up on this idea of duty and sticking to convention. You know, it's the thing is, the House of Lords, they keep saying it's a revising chamber, and it is. It's a revising chamber. It takes legislation from the House of Commons that has been presented by, you know, popular chimps and says, look, this isn't going to do what you think it is. Look, we'll cross this bit out and we'll put this bit in. And then they send it back. So what you need is people who are experienced at understanding and revising legislation, not people winning a popularity contest. So the unelected nature of the House of Lords at one time was absolutely fine. You know, you expect the House to be full of experienced lawyers, former senior MPs, business leaders, trade unionists, that sort of thing. We don't need the bishops, but they're relatively few in numbers or whatever. But this is not what we have now. We have a significant number of members who have no experience, no knowledge, no training of reading and understanding legislation. They put a cricketer in there, for goodness sake, and someone in their 20s, like, I don't even know what they are. You know, these are people that were sent there to vote along certain political lines, not even party lines, a much narrower focus than that. And if the Lords is not going to be comprised of members who have the proven skills to revise legislation, then there is no argument for them being appointed rather than elected. If you're going to send people who do not have the skills anyway, you might as well make them elected. Now, none of this means that the Rwanda Bill is passed in a form which allows the government to see itself above the law. It may well still be that the Lords is able to either delay it till the election, because remember, I still think the most likely time for the election is May. I'm not saying it's certain, but the most likely. But the fact that it might actually pass through in an unsuitable form, I don't care if it's actually complying with the law. I don't care about the bill in itself. It's the fact, does it allow the government to ignore courts, therefore be above the law? You know, the fact that it might is a direct consequence of the fact the Tories are giving the impression that they're going to rip up our constitutional norms for personal political advantage. If the Tories can use the House of Lords to blackmail Labour, then it should stiffen Labour's resolve to dealing with the issue. At the very, very least, make the Salisbury Convention a formal convention, not an unwritten rule, not like, you know, a gentleman's agreement, because there are no gentlemen anymore. Make it the law, part of constitutional law. Because if they're going to do this, if all they're going to do is end hereditary peers in the first term, then what's really happening is the opposition within Labour has basically got stamina to go, oh, for goodness sake. You know, all they're really doing is putting replacement of the House of Lords onto the, oh yeah, it'd be nice to do it. We'll put it on the pile of things to do when there's time. There will never be time, will there? There's never time when a Labour government has run out of things to do. Yes, I would want them to prioritise electoral reform of the House of Commons over the Lords if it came to a choice. But at the moment, they're basically going, yeah, it was sort of not a priority on both of them. If they really want to tackle the toxic nature of politics, as they insist they do, tinkering is not going to do the job. They're not going to restore trust in politics by simply being a better government and say, yeah, hereditary peer is no longer a thing. That's not going to do it. In the meantime, I am just going to have to play a waiting game on this bill. I'm not expecting a huge running commentary over the next couple of months. I don't think there's going to be any surprises initially. I mean, we never know, but I don't think so. So I may not have that much to say for a while. It might pop up now and then. I think the first stages will be predictable. Obviously, objections will be raised, revisions will be offered, and I think the House of Lords will vote in favour of those sensible revisions. It will then go back to Sunak in a couple of months. It's not going to go back to Sunak to like late March or something. And he will reject all the revisions. Again, I don't think that will be a surprise. The question will be what happens then. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.